Welcome to the Mad in America podcast, your source for science, psychiatry, and social justice.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karin Jervert, the arts editor at Mad in America, and today I will be talking with Elena Veljanovska, the curator of a really exciting upcoming conference online and in Berlin titled Madness: Fighting for Justice in Mental Health. I'll also be talking later in this podcast with three artists from a panel at this conference titled Art and Survivor Empowerment. The conference was created by the Disruption Network Lab and investigates systems of mental health care and support, focusing on prevailing discourses and practices, biases and inequality. It also explores the possibilities of a mental health system which puts human rights and justice at the center of its practice. The Disruption Lab network itself examines the intersection of politics, technology, and society, and exposes the misconduct and wrongdoing of the powerful. The conference is being held in Berlin as well as streamed online for free, November 25th through the 27th. You can view the conference live at disruptionlab.org. Later in this podcast, we will be interviewing artists Dolly Sen, Anika Krbetschek, and Marcello Lussana. But I wanted to talk briefly with Elena first, so she can tell us more about the conference and how it came about. Elena is a freelance curator and cultural manager and curated this year's conference for Disruption Network Lab. Welcome, Elena.
Hello, Karin, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. First off, I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
As you introduced me, my name is Elena Veljanovska, and as you mentioned, I'm a curator and cultural manager. Since 2019, I'm working in the Disruption Network Lab as a senior project manager, as well as a curator. I'm coming originally from North Macedonia, and I have previously worked as a curator in Contrapunkt from Skopje, where together with my colleague Iskra Geshoska, we founded, and for 5 years we were running the Festival for Critical Culture, CRIC. And this is among other cultural and artistic projects, of course. So another thing maybe about me is that in 2006, I co-founded Line Initiative and Movement. That was a platform for new media art and technology. So I was also running it as an artistic director until 2010. My experience comes largely from the nonprofit sector, from the civil sector. And even though for many independent projects, of course, I have collaborated with a lot of institutions over the years, but this is, kind of my main interest. And my educational background is in art history and archaeology, which feels a little bit far away now from what I do at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And first, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what the Disruption Lab Network does.
Disruption Network Lab, as you mentioned, is a nonprofit organization based in Berlin. It is founded in 2014 by Tatiana Bazzichelli, who is also currently the artistic director of the organization. And what we do is providing platform of events and research focusing on the intersection of politics, technology, and society. As you mentioned, our objective is strengthening freedom of speech and exposing the misconduct and wrongdoing of the powerful. So how do we do this? During one working year, let's say, this translates into organizing 3 interdisciplinary and international conferences per year, followed by 2 workshops with each conference, and then 6 meetups, 2 for each conference as well. So the conferences are usually proposing a topic, usually at the interface of scholarship and politics, human rights, technology, justice, and art, whereas the meetups focus more on building the local community around the same topics. So we are really addressing a wide range of topics. I just wanted to mention a few. For example, like in the past 1 or 2 years, we discussed gender transitioning, AI-powered military programs and targeted killings, conference on whistleblowing, for the whistleblowing anthology that we actually published last year, or the conference Behind the Mask about whistleblowing in the pandemic. That said, we develop really work that advocates for the globally marginalized and follow the motto uncovering systems of power and injustice. So the topics are just pointing at the depth of the problem in every field that we are working on. In order to achieve our goals, we collaborate a lot with whistleblowers, investigative journalists, human rights activists, hackers, and artists. And the listeners can find a lot more about our work on our website, disruptionlab.org, but also check past events on YouTube channels. And also they can download the book from our website if they would like to.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And this year you decided that the theme that you would be focusing on would be madness and mental health. Can you tell us more about how you conceived of that theme and how it was curated over time? I'd love to learn more about why this is what you chose to do this year.
Yeah, the conference comes with a little bit of a genealogy. As I said, we have years behind us. This is the 28th conference of the lab, working with marginalized groups and difficult topics that inevitably take the toll of the people that are involved. So this was a topic that, in a way, Tatiana had in the folders for a long time, and we wanted to address it, especially, the groups that we work with, like whistleblowers. They're really affected by also mental health, the whole mental health sector, among other things. So she was thinking initially also of this topic as a potential conference, also inspired by the patients movement globally and the Med Pride in Italy. But I think this awareness, amplified with the effects of the pandemic and isolation had on people, made us finally address it and devote a full conference and other events around it. In terms of curating, then she offered me to curate this conference. Then I decided, because I was really thinking, like, I'm coming from the field of critical culture, as well as I had in mind the work of the lab that we do. So I decided to focus the topic around the conversations about injustice and human rights, conversations that put the people affected and their rights at the center of the discussion. So we decided to, really answer on these main two questions. What does it mean to have a just mental health care system and who has access to it? But also, who decides who is labeled as mad? So I'm viewing this topic very critically, and by choosing speakers who are uncovering the systemic oppression, talking about racism and the need to decolonize psychiatry, address the big pharma, corporations, and media, over medication. These are all huge topics, and discuss state violence and judicial right of the people affected. But whereas the whole conference focuses on criticism, that should eventually lead to improvement of the mental health care systems and leading to the improvement of the livelihood of the people that are affected. But also I want to mention that in all our criticism, I'm realizing that I'm valuing quite a lot how much has been done so far, and that we can have this conversation at all on this level. So I think here now at this moment we will just stop, again continue criticizing, but also thinking of how much more we can do and what can be done. So last but not the least, I would say, is my personal motivation and interest in this topic, because through close family members that are affected, over the years I have built an insight into the mental health care systems in Macedonia, but also I'm just reading a lot and following. So the whole problematic was not completely unfamiliar to me. So this is where my interest and my knowledge as a curator, but also in how the system works, comes from. So I would just add maybe last that since the pandemic kicked in, also private motives, I also started embedding the healthcare topics into my curatorial work. So this is where also the decision to maybe to curate this conference came, to focus more precisely on the mental health care.
So it sounds like a lot of very important reasons: the pandemic, personal investment there, these huge issues of human rights and systemic oppression show up in your previous conferences, as well as realizing that mental health plays such an important role in justice. I've heard some people say that the seeing psychiatric oppression, if you don't see psychiatric oppression, you're not seeing the full picture of systemic oppression. And I see in the schedule of panels and talks that you're doing, the keynote speakers, there's these themes, these huge, important cultural, societal, economic themes of human rights, systemic oppression, state violence, decolonization. But art making plays a seemingly central role as well at the conference. And you have a panel of artists who we will be talking with shortly in this podcast, who are focusing on art and survivor empowerment. So, of course, this was something I'm very interested in as the arts editor at Mad in America. Why was it so important for you to include the arts in this conference?
Yeah, as I said, we really combine very intersectional, intersectorial approach in our conferences in general. But also art is my home quotation mark field, art and culture. So I really believe that artistic language can complement and add a completely different dimension to the discussion about mental health. So here I mean really arts in its widest sense, like all the formats like dance, performance, movement, painting, that are much more embodied practices, but also more conceptual forms like video art, film, or sound. So the art can diversify the vocabulary we have at hand when discussing mental health, I think, and also when we are discussing the experiences that the affected people have, the artistic practices are an obvious way of making these conditions experienceable, let's say, or bringing them closer to how it feels. So yeah, art for me simply is the one that has the role in this conversation, that has the capacity to give shape to feelings and emotions. Another aspect is that we will discuss on this panel, and is art used as a therapy, as a common tool in treatment. So here the artistic practices can serve as a coping strategy in themselves. So in the panel, both perspectives will be discussed hand in hand, because the panelists are also experienced in this, some of them. And this will be illustrated through the work of the speakers on the panel that you will also present. They present three approaches in art making, which are different in their format, style, and thematic focus, but they're all deeply insightful, subversive, and transformative. So for me, this was really crucial part of having this aspect at the conference. And this is, I want to just mention that it's not only the art panel is one thing, where we will present in-depth artistic approaches and strategies, but also in the same day we will open the conference with a performance with Marcello that you will also speak later on, and we will show a movie that is called Faces of an Exhibition, that actually works with people who are experiencing hearing voices and experiencing psychosis and schizophrenia. So they're also going through the process of the creation of a festival that took place in Berlin last year that was called Mental Festival for Schizophrenia. So we are also like including these practices that are rare and quite valuable for the conversation.
That's so wonderful, and I'm so looking forward to speaking to the three artists. And as a final question, you've touched on this a tiny bit, but I'd love to hear you expand on your thoughts around how do you see art making contributing to the fight for justice in mental health?
Yeah, it's not a simple answer, as any answer with art. Basically, it's not simple, because sometimes the conclusions come late, some years later maybe. But I think we need the arts in this constellation to achieve a more just and compassionate approach to mental health, as I also said earlier. To me, art can be straightforward, critical, political, bold, and subversive. And even though this is not often maybe seen as such from other fields, but there are many societal topics that are really discussed in the artistic field much earlier than any other field. So it is necessary to learn to pay attention and develop this kind of shared understanding of the individual experience so then we can come to the big general picture. So in this respect, the art is not only giving an opportunity to process personal experiences, but art can also be a vehicle in the survivor's fight for social justice and self-empowerment. So somehow this is where I see the role and the connection with the conference topic.
Thank you so much, Elena. I'm so excited for this conference. I will be watching live online, and I am so looking forward to all the wonderful conversations. And it is important work that you and the Disruption Network Lab are doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Karin. Really, thank you so much for showing an interest to cover the conference and to promote it, because I don't think there is a more fitting medium for this topic.
Wonderful. Thank you. To talk a little bit more about this topic, we invited the artists from one of the panels at this conference. Moderated by Lily Martin from the Atlantis University of Arts and Social Sciences, the panel focuses on art and survivor empowerment. And we'll talk with these artists about their artistic methodology while working with different mental health conditions by using research, humor, or art therapy as means of expression and framing proactive practices. I'll introduce each of these artists, and I'll start off with Dolly Sen. Dolly Sen has a brain of ill repute. Because of this, she is an internationally renowned writer, filmmaker, artist, and activist. She is a working class, brown, queer person who is interested in the disability and madness given to us by the world. She wants to disrupt the systems that produce that programming called oppression, not through Trojan horse viruses, but with my little ponies on acid, with a little sadness in their hearts. And you can learn more about Dolly Sen at dollysen.com. Dolly, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, as a way of a further introduction, I wanted to ask you, especially about Bedlam, your project Bedlam. This is a project. It's part of another project called Section 136. 136, where you have conversations about madness with people on a bed filled with stuffed lambs. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I've been a filmmaker for about 20 years. In fact, I did my degree in film. And I have tried to get films on mental health by survivors onto like terrestrial TV. And it hasn't happened. And also, when I've watched a lot of films, it's people who usually have a connection to mental health that are being interviewed. But I was actually interested in what the ordinary person on the street thought about mental health madness and what drives people mad and how we can help people. So I did two bedlams. One in actually Bedlam. I did it in Bethlehem Hospital, which its nickname is Bedlam, and I interviewed mostly artists, and some of them did have a connection to mental health. So they were very interested in the kind of political side of mental health and why people were driven mad and how the world drives people mad. And their answers to people's distress was partly political and making social changes. But then I did one in my then hometown of Great Yarmouth, which is quite a poor, deprived seaside town in Norfolk, England. So I did basically propped up the bed with lots of cuddly sheep on a high street and invited the passers-by to come to talk to me about madness. They had a slightly different approach, but almost everyone understood that things were like, for example, a lot of the answers when I asked what is driving people mad, more than two people said Boris Johnson. So then people talking about lack of secure housing, poverty, discrimination. So they understood that, which surprised me because I would have thought, a lot of people would have said, oh, it's something wrong with the brain, because that's the story that's put out by psychiatry. It's all in the brain. Like I said, I don't think of distress as a broken brain. I think of it as a broken heart. And so, yeah, it was an experiment that kind of confirmed what I thought of, what madness is. I mean, there are people who thought the answers to helping people was to invest more money in the mental health system. But mostly it was people saying that the person's situation and experience needed to be changed, and they couldn't change it. It had to be a political or economic thing.
It's actually really wonderful to hear because, you work in this field of activism, and you sort of feel that the medical model is so pervasive and the narrative is so ingrained that if you were to talk to the public, the answer would always be, there's something wrong with their brain. But you're saying that when you did the Bedlam Project, from the general public was actually, and maybe the way you frame the question too, what is driving us mad? Like that was a great prompt for them to really. It's just such a wonderful thing to hear that they actually did name oppression. They named housing trouble. They named these ways that mental health is not exactly encouraged in our social and economic environment. So that's really wonderful. Thank you so much for telling us a little bit more, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it as we do some more of the interviews. And I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Anika Krbetschek. Anika is a multidisciplinary artist and curator working artistically through mental experiences such as dissociation, trauma, compulsion, as well as its effects on identity and perception of the world. She learned how to express herself and transform emotions and experiences through working for years with and learning from art therapists. In her curatorial work and collaborative projects, she applies inclusive approaches and aims to build artistic spaces in order to create an empathic form of education around inclusion and mental health. You can find out more about Anika at anikakrb.com, and that's one word. Anika, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me.
Glad to have you. So I read something on your website when I was looking through that really jumped out at me as something I wanted to ask you to expand on. And can you tell us more about what you said when you said, without dream and intuition, nothing real can move?
So I would actually go back to being a child. Myself, I was very much absorbed by my dreamy way of perceiving the world around me. And also since today, I'm always getting lost in structures, in the branching of a tree, in the glittery surface of water and stuff. So this is really an essential part of my personality, which is also enjoyable. But I also know drifting away or a similar feeling, which is less enjoyable. And then drifting away comes as an freezing reaction to triggering situations, and it's less controllable, and it impedes my daily life. But through an artistic perspective, I built a relationship between my dreaminess and my dissociative disorder. And to explore this artistically releases so much tension inside of me. And it's such a beautiful act because through the connection, through connecting the dissociative state with dreaminess, or the concept of dreaming, will put this disorder outside of the frame of illness for me. And this artistic method is, I think it's linked to what a quote means. You can also see this in a project I do. It's called Amoeba, and for Amoeba I use the concept of unicellular beings and their way to move forward as a metaphor for psychological growth based on trauma. And in this work, movement in the sense of transformation is a task of the unconscious. So this is also what the quote says. Every outer movement evolves from an unconscious movement, like dreaming or intuition. And I think there's also something interesting about intuition, because even though I think 99% or something of the things we do intuitively, in capitalist societies we are very much focused on rationality. And this is also reflected in the mental health system. For example, when I did behavioral therapy, I learned how to analyze my behavior rationally a lot. And in many other forms of therapy, I did lots of tabular analyzing. And actually, I have to say I love analyzing as well. But still, there's so much lost if processes that are tickling the unconscious are neglected. And I think art and art therapy holds a perspective, a kind of perception that is not necessarily rational to think. And that's the reason why I love making art, and I want to make art as my profession, because I don't know any other job actually where I could use my psychological condition of being a dreamy, intuitive being, and also my so-called illnesses are so much of use and are actually an artistical resource. So yeah, I think real stuff in the end is like whatever real stuff is or reality is, but in the sense of something physically manifesting is something that will always be interpreted and perceived and understood in new ways through our unconscious part all the time. So this sentence tries to describe that, and also brings up the perspective, like pointing on the ability to use the act of dreaming and intuition to create and change reality.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I've never heard such a wonderful exploration, of an explanation of what art is, because I feel similarly to you of how this works in us, and how the opportunities and possibilities of it are for moving trauma. And also, I love the way that art can hold us as complete beings and different and diverse beings, which is just so wonderful. So thank you for that. I'm going to introduce Marcello Lussana. Marcello Lussana is a research associate and coordinator of the project Social Interaction Through Sound Feedback, Sentire. Since 2012, he has been a composer and programmer for different projects such as Motion Composer and Metabody. He lives in Berlin and produces computer music for audiovisual performances, dance, theater, and live electronics. He is currently a PhD candidate at Humboldt University of Berlin on the subject of interactive music and body perception. You can find out more about Marcello's project Sentire at sentire.me. Thank you so much for being here, Marcello.
Thank you for the invitation.
So again, as a way of introducing you a little further, I wanted to ask you, your focus as a composer has been on interactive systems. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yes, I mean, about 10 years ago, I started to discover different way of interacting with music. Because historically computer music or electronic music has been always seen as detached from body movement, because we don't have a direct interaction between the movement and the sound generated. But this kind of connection was reestablished since the 80s when in experimental arts, both performance or sound, but also other, more performance art, started to use different kind of sensor to connect body movement or biological activity of the body with, for example, sound generation. And I personally found it very interesting and motivating, this way of reconnecting the body with sound, because I think it's really at the basic of our way to interact with the world, not necessarily to work as a composer. So we usually move and hear some sound, and that's also how we relate to reality, or one way to relate to reality. And at the same time, I was very fascinated because this way of connecting body and sound generation also give you extra information about your perception, your body perception. And I also can relate to what Dolly and Anika said. On one hand, Dolly mentioned that psychological problem are often seen by psychiatrists more related only to the brain, but is actually a more embodied issue. So it would be very, very limiting to look at only at the brain. So if we instead focus on body perception, and that's what many art of therapy also do independently now from interactive sound, that's a way to get back to your body and get into this relationship between body and mind that in the end is only an abstraction. We always function, we always understand reality as a whole. And yeah, to me, connecting sound with movement was very interesting also from this possibly therapeutic usage, meaning as a gate, let's say, to body perception and at the same time to therapy. And yeah, the second thing related to what Anika mentioned was also how we can connect these, let's say, more dreamy human beings that we are in such a also very functional and very goal-oriented society, and I think I see this as a challenge for ourselves or for other people who get in touch with such artworks. Yeah, to question to question also the human functionality and the capitalistic society. So of course, it's a long path and it's very personal and it's definitely not straightforward. But to me, that's a strong motivation behind also my project.
Thank you so much, Marcello. Yeah, and I want to hear more about Sentire. And we'll talk when we're going to open up a little bit and talk with the three of you together about some things, some questions that I have about your art practice and the projects that you're working on. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about Sentire, which is one of the interactive sound works that you do as therapy. So we'll hear more about that. So let's dig into some art questions here with the three of you. The first one that I have is that something that, as I was doing research, just learning more about you all as artists, was that the thing that is common among all three of you is that, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you sort of see art as a practice that can, and a process that can transform distress. And I'm personally really curious to hear more about that process and have you all speak to how it manifests in your practice. Because I agree with that 100%. I think art is an absolutely transformative process in so many different ways. And I'd love to hear more from each of you about that question.
Well, for me, it's kind of a reclamation of power. It's changing the narrative of the story, because this is what I say to people. I mean, I'm a person who's experienced oppression and abuse, and those were the things that wrote my life story. And your creativity and art making is the way to take control of that pen. But it's also, in a lot of situations, if you're labelled mad, you're not allowed to tell the truth about anything. So the art is, enables you to tell the truth about yourself. But also, it's like I feel like I have to take on the world and change things. So art is also my kind of shield to be able to face the world. So yeah, it does a lot of things actually.
Do you think that the ability to hold and express truth is a core aspect of transformation?
I think so. I mean, art is the only way I can tell the truth and have people accept it, which it shouldn't be, but that's the way. That's the world we're living in at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah. So the act of telling the truth and being able to hold and tell the truth, but then also having the reception on the other end be compassionate and non-judgmental.
I would like to give an example regarding this getting control back thing, maybe in a different perspective, but I kind of tried to bring my therapeutic process last year on the stage in a quite direct way. So I was doing a reading performance, which was based on diaries entries of myself, which I did the last 10 years, containing texts and poems I wrote down in my diary to get along violence experiences and also sexual, physical, and mental abuse. And the central point in this performance was that I would always experience re-traumatization while reading these diary entries on my own. And I felt like bringing this intimate and also ugly moment on the stage and framing it into an artistic act would kind of give me control back over the situation, which was also a little bit of a risk because, yeah, I couldn't know before. I could also just have a flashback on the stage and that's it. But actually, I had a really powerful and therapeutic moment with this performance. And I also got resonated from the audience, them having a therapeutic moment with the performance as well. And I think this also brings light to the fact that illnesses, so-called illnesses, which are linked to certain experiences, such as trauma as a result of abusement, are framed in societal contexts and linked to structures of power and hegemonic structures. And that's why I think that making so-called illnesses visible through art is not only an act of self-therapy, but also always points to societal and systematic issues and also stands in an activistic and justice-related context.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, the individual transformation becomes collective transformation through the art process. Yeah, wonderful.
I mean, in a similar perspective, of course, in a very different way of performing and acting, but the intention of Sentire was also in this direction, because the way we usually perform is a performer is on the stage and she invites one person from the audience, and they interact together for about 10 minutes, and then next person, this whole for about 1 hour. And we always so the sound changes depending on the distance and touch between these two participants. And we always wanted to keep it this way, meaning we could have theoretically an extra sensor that detects the individual movement of one person, but we decided to keep it simpler this way, and the sound reacts based on both persons. And this means you have to be conscious of what the other person is doing and how it's relating to yourself. And if both persons are not moving or not changing the distance, but only individually moving, nothing changes in the sound. And so was also meant like that to create, let's say, more empathy and more connection between the two people interacting. And this so the performance was more open from this point of view, as art all often is. So art therapy in a broader sense. But it has been used in a couple therapy study, this system, for example. And in that case was more specifically used to whether talk about feelings and then act. For example, I don't know, the couple just had a fight and they had a therapy session, and they had to, as an exercise given by the therapist, they have to negotiate their distance. So it can work from both point of views. It can become a tool for therapy, but it can be also a tool for exploration and for exploring the other person or the connection with another person.
So I wanted to ask you more about this concept of art as activism and art as serving to contribute to human rights and justice in the mental health system. And I want to first ask you about how this your perspective, this perspective of art as transformation, how this informs your projects in mental health. So we did talk a little bit about it, but let's expand a little bit more about how your projects are being informed by this transformation, this way that art is transformational, and specific to how it's engaging with the mental health community.
So for me, as my development of becoming an artist is very much linked to my psychological working process, working with art means finding translations of inner psychic movements, of emotions, sensations, and impressions. But it's also holding something I think other disciplines can not for me. So finding a language for things that I couldn't say without art, especially being a survivor and an artist. I think mental experiences, especially trauma, needs ways to be expressed and processed, but also trauma taught me that not every memory can be approached directly. Sometimes you have to find ways around it, and I think art can deliver these ways to express feelings linked to trauma through abstraction or through metaphors, and it can be visual or coded in poems or in a movement of a performance or whatever. But as I learned how to work artistically, especially in my time working with an art therapist, of course, art therapeutical approaches and its methods are very essential in my art making process. So my working way is fundamentally marked by process orientation, by using intuitive and raw expressions, and also being bold with opportunities to self-reflect through your work. But it also becomes more and more important to me to contextualize my work and make it comprehensible, and yes, contextualize it in social structures. Because my aim in the end is to create emotional reactions, especially emotional empathy, like Marcello already said. And in the end, in order to destigmatize about so-called mental illnesses. And I think destigmatization is one of the most important processes for systematic change and structural change in a social way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you really quick about art therapy. I'm curious to know where you think that field is right now, as far as being aligned with alternative views and progressively, towards human rights and things like that. Because art therapy is a an institutional thing that can be subject to the same systemic oppression that other psychiatric models can. So I wonder, how you see that, where you see the art therapy model right now.
I think I cannot give like a very specific answer to that because I'm not an art therapist and I'm not really like in the research field of that. I just experienced art therapy, and that's also like 7 years ago. So there had been some major changes maybe. But I do know a bit about like the connection to outsider art, so-called outsider art. And I think this whole art field of everyone who's marginalized in the art industry is still very much in a conflict field of discrimination and inclusion. It's not really like there's a lot of happening and way more visibility, but still it's always like the separational system. Like we have a term, especially for people being outside of the artist world, and that's kind of an empowering process to have their own like category, but it's still a category and stuff like that. So I know that's not really like regarding the art therapy thing, but this was really an individual experience for me. So I don't want to say something which I don't know about. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, the idea of outsider art and all that, and the recognition and naming the idea that art can sometimes be the art making can create exclusion because of different ideas of what is an artist, what is art, what is good art, what is bad art. All these things can create these ways of excluding certain groups and marginalizing certain artists, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind as the opening this process to all people, as I would say, as it kind of was from the beginning of the human race. I mean, art was always just for everyone, so somehow we got a little lost in maybe the capitalist system around excluding and making an elite thing. So it's a very interesting conversation to have as well. And I want to give a little more time to Dolly Sen and Marcello too to talk a little bit more about the question of mental health, working within mental health with this perspective of art as transformational.
This is not related to that, but it's kind of a little bit of a response to what was being said before. When I started out as an artist, I was invited to an outsider art fair to sell my stuff. And I had the criticism that my work didn't look mad enough. They said you don't look mad enough. Your art doesn't look mad enough, so people won't be interested. So it's also it is kind of it is elitism, and it's one group of people dictating what the other should be, which like you said, art is for everyone. And and somebody else in the same fair said your art is too intelligent to be in this, and I just thought that was so disrespectful. But anyway, yeah. Well, I think art to me is kind of explores what it is to be human. Human is humanity is art, and art is humanity. And I think psychiatry is at the moment is quite inhumane, and so I'm trying to get the two to meet in the middle. But I actually was an activist before I was an artist, and I was standing outside the Maudsley Hospital, which is a very famous psychiatric hospital in London, where I was the patient, with a placard saying, abuses are happening here. And I realised that people passing me on the street were just thinking, this is just a loony. And I was having absolutely no impact or influence on the people who are running the place. And then I realised, I kind of did a few things, but I realised art and humour was the way to communicate to the public what was happening in a way they could understand and relate to, but also using art and humour actually had some, it was hard to ignore. It's hard for the heads of that hospital to ignore me doing a TripAdvisor review of their hospital, for example. It was. So yeah, the art came after the activism. So it's a great way to communicate, and it's also a thing that in some contexts can't be ignored.
Yeah, I think there is something about the context of art that creates something more accessible, something more relatable, something that can really perpetuate empathy and understanding, which is what you kind of try to elicit when you're trying to make social change, is for people to see the abuse that's happening there. So artists creating some kind of context that makes that more accessible.
Well, I think it relates to what I was mentioning before. So the transformation that was aimed in these artworks and theater was really to let the participant explore by themselves directly. That's why we wanted to engage the audience. And try out together with another person this connection with a sound. Also because I think proximity is not really a sense, is not really seen as a common, as one of the five senses, but it is somehow a sense, is a perception that we perceive all the time, actually, but usually we don't give so much attention to, is whether or we do give some attention, but in some specific context. For example, I don't know, for sex is something that proximity and touch has a lot of importance, but otherwise it's usually whether something professional, for example, when we do some kind of physical therapy, or is something comfortable, uncomfortable, someone getting too close to us, keeping a certain distance, and so on. The person who actually explore a lot this sense are, for example, dancers or performers. I mean, for a dancer, it's totally normal to play all the time with distance with other dancers or performers. And so, yeah, with Sentire, we hope to give to open this door of perception, let's call it like this, for the participants, and give a bit of a hint to what is there to explore, even without this system, because you can explore it every day, any moment. And so give just a bit of this hint in this direction, and hope that people explore more their body perception. And that, as I said before, for me is strongly body perception is strongly connected with therapy and also mental health. And so that's a bit the transformative potential that I see in Sentire.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm seeing it as a bit of like a door that can be opened, one of many that for people to explore their own emotions, their own relationship to the world, their relationship to their body, their relationship to other people's bodies, and all these things connect to how their relationship with the world is healed or healing or in the process of healing, and in effect in affecting their mental health. So it's a wonderful another way that people can travel that path towards healing, which is wonderful. Yeah. I'm just thinking, like thinking out loud at this moment. Like I remember there's this book called, I think it's called The Silent Language, and it was about um, uh, nonverbal communication. And I remember reading it way back when I studied communications in college, and the amount of communications that's happening in a nonverbal way, like with space and proximity and things like that, is actually quite profound and quite immense. So it's a very rich part of the human experience to explore as far as how it relates to healing. So.
Yes, actually, the book is from Edward Hall. That was actually the person who coined the word proxemics. Proxemics is the mixture of, is basically the study of distance between humans, but in the case of Hall was meant also for architecture and urbanistic. But now it's an established term to talk about distance and also the cultural value of that. So not only the physical distance, but how we perceive distance based on age, on a cultural background, and of course, as is the subject of all this conversation, is strongly related also to our mental state. And I would say, especially in the case of different condition of mental health, the perception is strongly different also between individuals. And so I think it's very important to talk about, to see distance from this more complex way and not just a measurement in centimeters.
Yeah, and this reminds me, jumping to another book that I read called Healing Spaces, which is about that architectural way that we create institutions of healing, like hospitals. They didn't talk much about mental hospitals, but I'm working on a project actually with people in Berlin right now, Sound and Psych, around how sound environments affect our mental health and how mental institutions are built in a certain way and create certain sounds and affect how we sound, and what sounds we're comfortable making, what, if we're allowed to listen to music, or things like this, the restricted sound in an environment that is connected to the power dynamic in that situation. So I'm just noting that all of these ways that we don't normally think about healing are so important, because environments are built around how human beings interact and communicate with one another. And these environments can be detrimental to our health, and they can be helpful to our healing in this, depending on how we approach the research and wisdom that we are looking for in these specific ways of interacting, of humans interacting. So it's just such an interesting conversation all around with all of you. And I just think that we'll just finish off with one last question, and it's a little bit of an expanding again on this social justice issue that the conference is based on, that the madness and justice in mental health. If you were, and I'll rephrase it a little bit here, is like, if you were to see art playing the ideal role in mental health institutions today, what do you think that would look like? What do you think that would be, for each of your perspectives, in each of your perspectives?
That needs a lot of deep thinking, I think. But the instinctive answer I can come up with, just give it over to the artist for a year and see how it goes.
Oh, yes. I love that. Yeah.
Well, very, very general, but I think there is a big need of connecting with human beings. I don't remember who said that. Unfortunately, I forgot. But someone said that in our society we see mental illness as a problem, but probably in more traditional societies, people with such problems would be probably shamans, or some kind of people who works with healing, with dreaming, as Anika mentioned before, with art, and with therapy in the end. So I think we should find a way to understand better what we call mental issue, and work more at the core of our society, because in the end this is only a problem of a society, and that just pops up as a problem of individual persons. But so I think that's what we really need. We need more connection between people in our society. That's probably what is most missing.
I think this is a very interesting perspective regarding the fact that there is a very intense history of art and psychiatry. So this history is very much marked by separation and discrimination and abusement. There's this psychiatric art. Not a very much good word for me. And yes, very much marked by injustices and injured human rights. So the fact that artists with mental illnesses are now able to work artistically, and every time we are working around mental conditions authentically and critically, is some kind of collectivistic healing process, I think, regarding this history of psychiatry and art. Still, the art market and the art industry suffers from problematic structures, especially for marginalized groups. But I think there's so much potential for inclusion, like in a wide understanding of inclusion of all marginalized groups, not only people with disabilities and mental illnesses, but actually good for all of us. This inclusion is fundamentally linked to human rights. So regarding all the potential art has for collaborative work, I think there's a very big potential.
Gosh, thank you so much, all of you, for being here with me today. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mad in America podcast. Visit madinamerica.com for more news, views, and updates.